to talk to you just a little bit today by way of introduction of Dr. Bacigalupa's talk. The topic for today concerns one of the general education areas that the FYE program meets. That is area A3, your critical thinking requirement. Okay? Here's the way I like to think about this in my sections when I did. Is everybody entitled to his or her own opinion? Don't answer that question. I want to get to Dr. Bacigalupa. But that's the question at issue for it. Is everybody actually entitled to his or her own opinion? Well, I hope I'm going to shock you a little bit by saying that coming up through the thousands of years of liberal arts education, all theory and practice, the answer to the question may actually be no. Everybody is not entitled to their own opinion. Everybody is entitled to hold a position, to hold positions on topics that we argue about. And everybody is entitled to argue for those positions. And everybody is entitled to listen to other people's arguments and to change their minds if they hear better arguments. And they're entitled to lose opinions or positions if they are convinced of better positions. That is how things work in the academy. And we are here to change you in that direction. That is what we hope to do. I'm being very honest with you. We hope that you leave the FYE program and leave Sonoma State University as people who don't any longer accept bad positions or dumb opinions. Sorry for that. Okay. What this long tradition of study about how human beings know things has taught us is this simple and really kind of painful fact. We, with our unaided brains, kind of suck at knowing the truth. So what we human beings have done is we have devised ways to feel more certain about what we know. And these are the methods of science, critical thinking, all the rigorous ways of knowing that we can count on to teach us better what we know, to teach us that we really know what we know. To talk to us about that today is Dr. Chiara Bacigalupa, who is chair of the Department of Early Childhood Studies here at Sonoma State University. She has her PhD from the University of Minnesota. She has her master's degree. She also is a CSU alum from CSU Northridge, bachelor's from UC Santa Cruz. She is a professor in the area of child development, early childhood education. She's been a teacher and educator for quite a long time. Served as coordinator of the freshman year experience program for the last 2 years. And has been a long-time teacher in the program. Let's have a big, warm FYE welcome for Dr. Chiara.
Okay, thanks. And I have to turn this on. Okay, does that make a difference at all? Doesn't sound like it to me. Hello. Are we okay anyway? Do I speak loud enough? Should I start yelling? Okay, so thanks a lot. So like Scott said, I'm going to talk to you about critical thinking, why be critical, why do we think this is important, why did we dump you into this class? Why do we make every freshman at Sonoma State take a critical thinking course? All good questions. Okay, so up until now, you've spent a lot of time in school. Right, presumably at least 12 years in school, and I would argue that probably a lot of what you've been doing in school is learning facts, and that's just a statement about the public school system in the United States for the last 12, 13, 14, 15 years, maybe even longer than that. But you went through a system that was very focused on facts, and you don't know this guy, but your professors do, because they're old. But there's this, he used to talk about just the facts, we just want the facts. And I want to argue against that. I want to say in college, it's really not about just the facts. And so if you came here prepared to memorize and take a lot of multiple choice tests, which is presumably what you've been doing a lot of up until this point, I hope that that's not actually going to be your experience here. because if it is, you're going to get really robbed. Okay, so why do I think that? Why can I say we really don't need to be so concerned about the facts? Lots of reasons. The first one, though, is probably just sitting in your pocket. I think you've been told not to take these out in here. I don't know, we used to tell you guys not to take them out. Go ahead and take it out for a minute. And let's see what this is good for. Hopefully you recognize this picture. I mean, you may not have seen it before, but it should spark something in your brain. Like 2 weeks ago, they asked you to read the Allegory of the Cave, and John Kornfeld came, and he talked to you the very first week about the Allegory of the Cave, and Plato wrote this, and he was talking about these people who are looking at shadows, and they're in this cave, and right, okay, hopefully somewhere in there you remember something about that. So if we had just asked you to read that, and we cared about the facts, we might ask you a question like this. When was the Republic written? So the Allegory of the Cave is a part of the Republic. Okay, does anybody know the answer to that question? When was the Republic written? Yeah, you know, I didn't either until I looked it up. So go ahead and look it up. Let's see how long it takes somebody to find the answer to this question. When was the Republic written? Just shout it out when you got it. 3 AD BC. Yeah, that's exactly what I found with my same device. Okay, so why would I spend time as a college professor trying to get you to memorize a fact like this when you could look it up in seconds, you have the answer? And I don't carry this fact around in my head either. I don't think we need to be spending a lot of time doing that. Now, I'm not saying facts are not important. If you go out into the world and you have a BA, let's say in environmental science, and somebody asks you a question about environmental science and you're like, I don't know, let me look it up. You're not going to look that good, especially when you want to be hired by somebody. So the facts, they are important. It's important to know them, but that's not going to be sufficient. Okay, because more likely people are going to be asking you questions that might look a little bit more like this. Okay, so what is the significance of the Allegory of the Cave? Or in other words, what does it mean? You can try answering that on your phone. And I'll bet you actually would find an answer. I don't think I'm going to spend time right now asking you to do that. But so you can go ahead and put your phone back away so your peer mentors don't have to get mad at you. Okay, so but I actually did look that up, and here's what I found. The importance of the allegory lies in Plato's belief that there are invisible truths lying under the apparent surface of things which only the most enlightened can grasp. Okay, so the internet told me that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I haven't attached it to anything. So what, right? The real question, kinds of questions that I want to ask about the Allegory of the Cave. Number one might be, why were you assigned to read it? We've assigned this reading. I think this is the only reading in FYE that's been assigned every single year, at least when I was teaching it. So 6 years, this would be the 7th year for sure. Probably it's the 8th year. Why? We've changed almost every reading in this class. Why did we keep this one? Okay, that might be an interesting question for you. What is its significance in relation to FYE? Why do we care? What do we think is so important about this? Okay, I'm pretty darn sure that you can't find that answer on the internet. No one's going to tell you why a group of professors got together, decided on this particular reading, and want you to read it in FYE in fall 2014. But this is the kind of question that your professor is going to be asking you throughout college. And it's the kinds of questions that you're going to be asking yourself once you get out of college and you get into a career, a family, some kind of a life out there in the real world. Okay, and my proposition is, oops, went too far in that one. Okay. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to argue today that you need to be able to answer questions like those. You need critical thinking to do it. And in fact, critical thinking is the most important thing that you're going to learn in college. Okay, and people will argue with me about this. And my friend Tim, who doesn't seem to be here. Oh, there he is. Hey, Tim. Okay, Tim likes to argue with me that imagination is more important than critical thinking. I'm not going to take time today to argue against him because he hasn't presented his argument to you, and that wouldn't exactly be fair, and I pulled the rug out from under him anyway, so that's not very nice. But we can have that argument anytime you like. Okay, so I'm not going to make that particular argument, but I am going to try and make an argument without talking about imagination anyway. Okay, first things first though, oh, and you probably talked already a little bit about arguments in your section, so you know this is my conclusion. What's my next job? I'm going to have to give you lots of reasons why I think this is true. Okay, so that's my entire lecture here. Here's my conclusion. I'm going to give you lots of reasons. But before we do that, let's define critical thinking. Any good argument starts with a definition because we all have to agree what we're talking about. So this is a definition that comes out of a critical thinking book. There's literally hundreds of critical thinking books. This is one that I think some of your professors are using. It seems fine. There's lots and lots and lots of different definitions of critical thinking. They use different words. But they all kind of say the same thing. First, it's about thinking. It's about using your brain in some kind of purposeful way. And it's critical, meaning that you're going to do some kind of evaluation. You're going to take ideas apart. You're going to look at them more closely. I like to say you're going to dig deeper. And you're going to evaluate those ideas. You're going to say, yeah, this idea is a good idea. This idea, not so good. This idea, I'm not sure about. This one, I want to look at some more. Usually when we talk about critical thinking, that's more or less what we're talking about. Okay, notice that critical thinking doesn't mean I'm going to make other people feel bad because they're so dumb to have said the thing that they said. So critical has kind of a negative connotation. Some of us don't like to be critical, others of us do like to be critical. But it doesn't have anything to do with being mean, making somebody feel bad, tearing something apart in that sense of doing it in a malicious kind of a way. It means looking more closely and evaluating. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. Okay, so enough with definitions. This one's admittedly a pretty boring definition. I think sometimes an example helps us to understand what something is better than a definition. So I've got an example here. I think most of you know this guy. As you watch this clip, I want you just to think about why do I think that this is an example of critical thinking. And if you don't like this guy, maybe you're going to practice some critical thinking right now, and you're going to think about, even if you do like him, you can do this, what might be wrong with his argument. Okay, so two things. One, what's his argument? What kind of critical thinking moves is he making? And two, is there anything that you don't particularly like about his argument? Probably if somebody could get the light, that would be great. Okay, so a lot of stuff in there. So basically, Fox News Jon Stewart had made fun of Fox News for having these shows about people on welfare, and then Fox News got upset about that, said that he was mocking them for exposing government waste, and he comes back and he says, no, I wasn't mocking you for that. I was mocking you for something different. So, anybody, what can we do with this in terms of our own critical thinking, or what do you think he's doing that's a good example of critical thinking? Yeah?
He was quoting them?
He was quoting them?
Yeah.
So, and how is that critical thinking?
Because they use exact instances so that it's not just him putting words in their mouths, he's actually showing them saying it.
Okay, awesome. So he's providing evidence, right? This is exactly what they said. Providing evidence. That's a good part of critical thinking. Anything else? Yeah.
He isn't taking what we're saying at face value, he's taking what we're saying and then examining it.
Okay, he's examining it, and he's doing a couple of moves that you guys haven't necessarily learned about before, but he's exposing a couple of fallacies. So first, he's doing something called a straw man fallacy. They came back and they said, you're wrong because you exposed us for exposing these welfare abuses, and there's nothing wrong with that. And Jon Stewart says, yeah, actually, I agree with you. There's nothing wrong with exposing abuses of welfare, but I wasn't mocking you for doing that. I was mocking you for what these other things that you were doing. So that's called a straw man. When you say somebody made this argument and now I'm going to tear it apart, but you're not actually tearing apart the argument you made. So the other thing he's doing is he's showing that they're using a hasty generalization, and that's where his real argument is. This is the thing that he was doing that they didn't label him as having done. He's saying, you found one example, and then you're trying to make us believe that everybody on welfare, to some degree or another, is doing this kind of thing, buying lobster with their food stamps. And we don't have any reason to believe that. Just because you found one guy doesn't mean that everybody else who's using welfare is doing the same kinds of things. That's a hasty generalization. You're going to learn more about that. But exactly what you said over here. He's digging deeper. He's providing evidence for what he's saying, digging deeper, trying to figure out, is what they're saying, does it really make sense or does it not make sense? He does something, you can be critical of him. Sometimes my students are critical of Jon Stewart. He does something that can be a little bit iffy. He takes things out of context, right? He shows you these short little clips and you don't really know what they're attached to. So it could be that some of those clips actually made a lot of sense, or that they were saying something a little bit different from what he's showing us. So the one about the refrigerator, I always want to ask, well, what was it actually saying about 99.6% of people own a refrigerator? I don't know what Fox News was trying to say about that. Was that actually a dumb thing to say, or was there some point behind that? And I don't know because he used that short little clip. So critical thinking goes both ways. It's not just, only one group of people knows how to do it and they make everybody else look stupid. Anybody can do it, and that's the cool thing. That's why you're here, is because you can do it too. Okay, so Jon Stewart, what's really cool about him, what I love about him, is that he makes it look fun. A lot of people watch him. Sometimes critical thinking says like, oh, that kid's really, really boring. You're asking me to think, and it's hard, because it is hard to be a critical thinker, and not very fun. But he makes it look fun. And I hope that in FYE, at some point, you have the experience of, even if the people in your class are not comedians and your instructor's not a comedian making you laugh all the time, I hope that you have that satisfying experience, what it feels like to see an argument and be able to say something really intelligent about it, and to be able to think about an issue in a brand new way because you were thinking about it critically. So my first reason why critical thinking is important, while it's fun, it's satisfying, it's a very good thing to do in terms of just your own mental development, but also just emotionally it's very satisfying. And I think it's important that we have things in our lives that make us feel satisfied. So that's my first reason. My second reason, and this is really the bulk of my argument here, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples of it. It helps you to guard against, or critical thinking helps you to guard against the many different ways that your brain can be tricked. So we already saw a couple of those. I said Jon Stewart had exposed the straw man fallacy. We're easily tricked when people say, yeah, you made this argument, but it wasn't the argument that he was making. It sounds good to us because we're not really paying attention. We're easily tricked when people make hasty generalizations because we're not really paying attention. There's other ways that we could be tricked as well. I'm actually going to skip this really cool thing, but I don't have as much time as I thought. But ask me about that sometime. You can come to my office hours and ask me. Okay, another way that our brains can be tricked is that we're not so good with statistics. People use statistics against us all the time. One of the places this shows up is in basketball games. There's something called a hot hand phenomenon, or maybe you just think of it as a lucky streak. So a lot of us believe that if a player has been making a lot of his shots, he's more likely to make his next shot. That he's on a streak. His streak's not going to be broken. The chances are really good because he made the last 5 baskets, he's going to make his next one as well. And if you ask basketball fans, 91% of them will say, yes, that's true. But if you're a statistician and you go in and you watch games, it turns out it doesn't matter how many baskets you just made, your odds of making the next one are exactly the same as they were before you made all the other ones. That's just how it is, and that's what the numbers prove. It's a fact, actually, that whether or not you made the last 5, 6, 20 baskets does not really impact whether or not you're going to make the next one. But we think it does because we like this idea of a lucky streak. It's what stands out to us. When somebody happens to be on a streak, that's what we notice and that's what we remember. So we're easily misled by statistics. That happens every day. Another way that we're sometimes misled is the way that people frame issues. And I see this in the news all the time. So I'm going to pick on CNN a little bit right now, but I could pick on anybody. This is just one day I just was on the internet and I saw this, and this who's winning the debt debate question really struck me. Because it's not really a contest. So this was this was a while ago, it's back when Obama was more recently elected, and people were really looking at the problems after the recession and what are we going to do, and Republicans had one answer and Democrats had another answer and Obama had his answer, and who's going to win this question of how we're supposed to attack the debt in this country? Well, it doesn't really matter who wins. That's not the question. The question is, how are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to solve this problem in a way that advances the common good? How are we going to solve it so that a lot of people benefit and other people are not hurt? That has nothing to do with whether it was Obama's idea or McCain's idea or whoever. Mitch McConnell's idea. It doesn't matter whose idea it was. Is it a good idea? But we're constantly in the media, constantly framing questions, especially about politics in this country, in terms of who's winning and who's losing. And I would say it just doesn't matter, but we get caught up in this, right? And it doesn't help that we do elections where people win and people lose, and then the whole thing gets conflated in our minds where, yeah, I want the Republicans to win, or no, I want the Democrats to win. It's not about that. The question is, who's got the right solution? That's what we ought to be looking at, but CNN doesn't help us when they frame issues this way. And there's lots and lots of different ways that people frame issues. That's just one example. Okay, another reason why we are so easily tricked, why our brains are it's so easy to mislead us, is because we believe things that we want to believe. We all have a worldview, right? I grew up in a certain place at a certain time. My parents belong to this religion, blah, blah, blah. I have all these things in my background that make me believe the world works in a specific way. And sometimes it's hard for me to get out of that background. So for some people, back when Obama was more recently elected, they really weren't excited about the fact that we had a Democrat and an African American for a president. And they were looking for reasons to believe that he wasn't really good presidential material. So one of the things that they came up with was this idea that he had faked his birth certificate and he wasn't really born in the United States. Okay, there's never been one shred of evidence that that is true. But a lot of people believed it. A lot of people still believe it. There's nothing. There's no evidence anywhere that that might be true, and yet a lot of people believe it. Why? Because it fits with their worldview, okay, that Obama shouldn't be president. Okay, other things, we do this all the time. Another thing, you guys are a little young to remember this, but the whole 9/11 lead up to the second war in Iraq, there was a lot of talk at that time that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Okay, this scared a lot of Americans and made a lot of Americans much more sympathetic to the idea that we should go to war. Again, there wasn't any evidence. There were people in the world saying there are no weapons of mass destruction. He doesn't have any. There's no evidence that he has any. But this story that he did made more sense to a lot of people. And it justified a pretty bad war. Because we want to believe things we want to believe. Just a couple more points about this. You can't see this picture very well, but Obama's there. He's got a polo shirt on. He's got his hand up like this, and he's got this kind of, I don't know, not exactly scared look on his face, but defensive. He looks defensive. Think about how that whole cover would be different if he was looking presidential, right? They could have found a picture where he looked like a president, where he had a suit on, where he was looking confident, where he wasn't looking defensive. The way they put that picture together makes you think maybe that story's true. Maybe he really wasn't born in the United States. I'm going to buy this magazine and find out. I really can't wait to see what they have to say about this. Right? It's just to make you buy it. But they're using images in very specific ways. That's something that you'll look at again in FYE. How do people use images to manipulate you? And we do. In the United States, we love using images to manipulate people. And I'm a victim of manipulation all the time. I'm not saying that we're stupid for that. I'm saying we're human. We tend to be easily manipulated. And that's why you need to be a good critical thinker. So you can stop and say, why did they choose that picture of Obama? Okay, so lots of ways that we can be swayed and that we can be convinced that things that aren't necessarily true are true. And like I said, I think number 2 is probably my most important point. There's lots of ways that people in our culture are going to be trying to sway you over to their side, to get money out of you, to get you to vote a certain way, to get you to support whatever it is that they want to do. And you need to be able to guard against that. And critical thinking, I think, is your best tool against that. Okay, but if that doesn't sway you, we all have a propensity or an inclination to do what the people around us are doing. So let me show you an example of this.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. You're going to see a fellow who fights a little bit to withstand the group pressure now. He expresses his comfort in the way he looks and the way he wiggles a little bit, but watch. He's right in the groove now. The elevator hasn't budged, but the doors open a moment later, and this we find. He's very unhappy. You'll see him. He doesn't know whether to go inside and face front or outside and face back. But he's one of the group now. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we can reverse the procedure? Watch.
Okay, so that video makes a pretty good point there, that we tend to follow the crowd. And I think you can imagine if you were in that elevator, you would probably feel like you needed to turn around, even though you had no reason to do it, right? And you would think in your head, why are we turning around? But you'd probably still do it. Or you can think of other situations where you went along with what other people were doing. Okay, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing for kids. They learn a lot about social cues from the people around them, from watching. They learn to do things by watching other people, and we all need that. The problem is sometimes the people around you are doing something that's immoral or stupid, and you need to be able to think it through and say, well, I'm not going to do that particular thing just because everybody else is doing it. And I think some of you are facing that right now living in the dorm. You're watching people take a certain approach to college, and you're wondering, should I do it that way? It It looks like everybody else is doing that way, but it doesn't feel right for me. Probably, you're doing that. Okay, so that's a little bit of critical thinking about it that way. Okay, so we all want to do what the people around us are doing, but sometimes we need to think about it before we actually do it. Okay, the first three reasons aren't convincing you that critical thinking is important. Just in your own self-interest, you're going to need it. And this is a little bit related to, we started with the allegory of the cave. Let's talk about a little bit that particular thing a little bit more. Okay, so I asked you to read the Sneetches. How many of you read the Sneetches as a kid? Okay, and hopefully you read it again now. So if you've never read it before, you know what we're talking about. If you read it a second time as an adult, it probably looked a little bit different to you reading it now because it has a lot of different ways that it can be interpreted, a lot of different meanings. So I'm kind of curious to think what you think about the Sneetches, but we're not in a small class. It's going to be kind of hard to talk to all of you about what you think. So I've just done something that's not the best way to teach or anything like that, but we're going to do it anyway. You can take out your phone again, and I put together a little one-question survey. I'm giving you some options. What is the Sneetches about? What is the meaning of the Sneetches? If you could just choose an answer real quick, just do it once, and let's see what you think. You guys finding it okay? I took it off the screen. Shit. Okay, we can go back. tinyurl.com/FYE Sneetches. It's just a survey, monkey survey. I think you have 5 options. Working? Okay, if you didn't get it, you didn't get it. Let's look at what's coming in. Okay, so with 58 of you answering, the top answer clearly is the most popular one. It's an allegory about racism and prejudice. Let's just refresh again, see what we get. I was going to use poll everywhere for this, which would be a lot better, but it would only give me 40 answers. I must be wrong. Okay, 99 people. It's still an allegory about racism and prejudice is still the most popular answer. Not so popular, an allegory about tattoos. Somewhat popular, 15% of you, an allegory about consumerism or capitalism. Entertaining story about fictional beings, not so many of us. Other, you want to see what people said? Other, haven't read it yet, about peer pressure, how people follow conformity, peer pressure, social norms. Okay, so that's what you guys were thinking. Okay. So there's not really a right answer to this question, right? What is the Sneetches about? Hold on. There's lots of different ways you can answer that. In college, your professors are going to be interested in how you answer that question, and most important, how you support your answer. Okay, what do you say to support your idea that this is an allegory about racism and prejudice? Okay, so a lot of people share, so that was our most popular answer. I kind of knew it was going to be our most popular answer. So I put together an argument for why it's an allegory about racism and prejudice. There's a book called Tales for Little Rebels, and the authors of that book, they look at a lot of children's literature, and especially books that they think are rebellious. I'm not sure why the Sneetches isn't there, but it's in there. And they talk about the fact that when Dr. Seuss was in college at Dartmouth, when he was a freshman, he really wanted to pledge to a fraternity, but he didn't get invited to pledge in any fraternities at all. And he ascribed it to the fact, that quote up there, that he had black hair and a long nose, and that people thought that he was Jewish. And that in that time and place, being Jewish was not perceived as a very good thing. And there's a lot of racism against Jews, and he believes that's why he wasn't asked to pledge. And I think he's probably right. I'm not questioning that. So the authors of this book say, picked on for his ethnicity and appearance, Seuss grew up to attack prejudice in books like Courtney's and Who and the Sneetches. So they're giving a reason why this was an important issue to him. It's because he'd been a victim of prejudice. They also point out that in the original draft for that book, he ends the story with these words. And really, it's sort of a terrible shame, for except for those stars, every Sneetch is the same. Okay, he actually changed the ending, so that's not the ending, but this was his original ending. So clearly he was thinking about prejudice when he wrote that book and the idea that humans fundamentally are the same. Okay, and if you don't like their argument, there's another guy, Peter Dreyer, on truthout.org, writes about this. He says the story is an obvious allegory about racism and discrimination, clearly inspired by the yellow stars the Nazis required Jews to wear. Okay, so a lot of people agree with those of you who chose that answer. Okay, so are you right? Well, this is pretty good evidence. What about, I think our second most popular answer is an allegory about capitalism or consumerism. So what's the argument behind that? This is the one I would argue. So what do we know about Dr. Seuss? Well, before he wrote children's books, he did political cartoons, and that's an example of one of his cartoons. And people say that Jack in the Box is a precursor to the Grinch. But anyway, before he ever even conceived of the Grinch, he was doing political cartoons for a magazine called PM, and it was a liberal publication. So we know that he was probably pretty sympathetic to liberal views, and he was a long-time contributor to that magazine. I would go back to the book as well, and you should, recognize this picture. We've got Sylvester McMonkey McBean here standing in front of a pile of money. We've got the words, then when every last cent of their money was spent, the fix-it-up chappie packed up, and he went. And he laughed as he drove in his car up the beach. They never will learn. No, you can't teach a Sneetch. Right, so that makes him sound like somebody very interested in making money off of this situation. He's not there to help them with their problem that they're all fighting over whether or not they have stars. He's there to make money, which would be a statement about consumerism. Not good enough for you. We could point out that there are other capitalist villains in Dr. Seuss books. I think that this was something that was on his mind. Did you think about the Grinch? The Grinch believes that Christmas is about presents. And there's a few people on the internet go so far as to argue that Max, poor little Max, is his abused worker, which I think is a pretty funny idea. But if you don't buy that the Grinch is a capitalist, the Onceler, clearly somebody in the Lorax who's making money at the expense of the environment, cares more about making that money, at least at the time when he's doing it, than he does about the common good of what's happening to the environment. So I think you can make a pretty good argument that Sneetches is about consumerism as well, but we don't have to choose one or the other, right? So my point here, though, is that your professor's going to ask you to read things a lot more complicated than the Sneetches. They're going to ask you, what is that about? And they're going to ask you to support your answers. And you're going to need to do something like what I just did. You have to go see what other people said, think about it for yourself, come up with examples, go back to the text, and make an argument. And that's what they're looking for. So, that's why my reason number four, why critical thinking is important, because you're going to need it in college, but also beyond college. And I'll just give you a quick example. Right now at my house, my daughter's planning to go to Israel on Sunday and do a little kind of study abroad thing. It's not actually through her school, but it's a study abroad kind of a thing. And I think it's a pretty dangerous time to go to Israel. I've been watching the news, been paying a lot of attention, and the more I pay attention, the more I'm like, oh my gosh. And I understand that the news is full of propaganda, all kinds of images that don't necessarily match up with reality. There's tons of places in Israel that are relatively safe, blah, blah, blah. I understand all of that. It still worries me. I still don't want her to get on a plane on Sunday. I also don't want to tell her, no, you can't go because I'm the mom and I'm making the decision. So we're having these long discussions at my house about, is it safe to go to Israel or is it not safe to go to Israel? And it could go both ways. And her dad's on her side. Okay, they're kind of teaming up against me. But at our house, it's not about who gets the most votes and who wins that way. It's about what is the answer? Is it safe or is it unsafe? Is it so unsafe that she really shouldn't go? Or is it just unsafe in the way that travel is always unsafe? Or is it relatively a little bit more unsafe than going to the UK right now, but maybe it's worth it? We're having those kinds of discussions. We're trying to take a critical thinking approach to it. Okay, so sneeches, who cares what is the meaning of sneeches? It's not a why for death kind of question. But it trains you, by doing something like that, you're trained to think about questions, dig deeper, present your arguments, and think about other people's arguments so that you can solve the problems that come up in your life. And that takes me to my fifth reason, which is the most important thing about critical thinking is that it's the way that we solve problems. We all have different values, beliefs, religions. We come from different places, right? There's all kinds of ways that we differ, and we all want what we believe to be the thing that everybody else believes, and that's how we solve the problem. But that's just not going to happen. We're all different. But the thing that we all have is rationality. We all can look at an argument and say, that doesn't make sense, or that makes sense, or that's a better answer. It's not my favorite answer, but I can see why you think it's a better answer. And that's how we can solve a lot of the problems that we all share because we all live together by using our critical thinking. Okay, so I gave you 5 reasons why critical thinking is important, but if you're really thinking about what I'm saying up here, that wasn't my thesis. I didn't say critical thinking is important. I said it's the most important thing you'll live in college, and I have failed so far to make that argument, and I've got about 2 minutes to make my argument. Okay, I said it's the most important thing. I'm not saying it's the only important thing. There's lots and lots and lots of things you can learn in college that are important. But I do think, I know that 2 weeks ago, John Kornfeld stood up here and he begged you really seriously think about your role in your education. He asked you to think about taking responsibility for your own education. And what I'm saying is, I think you should take critical thinking really important. I think you should put a lot of your effort in your college education into thinking about critical thinking. Okay? Why? Really quick. I have one reason why, which is that anything that you do, anything that you learn here, you're going to make it better. It's going to be more useful to you if you apply some critical thinking. So really quickly, 1 minute. A lot of people say in college, the most important thing that's going to happen is you're going to make these lifelong friends. Yeah, those are my friends from college. I still keep in touch with them. One of them came to my house last year. I married one of them. Critical thinking is what helps those relationships, though, to survive. So 27 years of marriage, probably we wouldn't have gotten there without some critical thinking. So yes, the relationships are important, and critical thinking helps them to survive, makes them better. A lot of people say in college you learn life skills. Okay, yeah, things like doing your laundry, getting a job, paying your own bills. Again, you're going to learn how to do all those things, but you need to be able to think critically about them. Last but not least, hopefully while you're here, you're going to learn how to solve all the world's problems. Maybe you're going to learn how to turn the planet from a dirty place to a clean place. Great, awesome, I'm glad you found that solution, but you're going to have to convince everybody else to pay for your solution, to vote for your solution, to work on your solution. You're going to need critical thinking to do that. I'll see you this afternoon at 4.